At 5:45 p.m., I'd like to welcome you all to the November 6th SNA meeting. We'll start with roll call and attendance. John Bowen emailed, he is excused. Joseph Bryant.
Here.
JD Sherest. Sarah Feeney is excused. Miles Glover.
Here.
Sharon Jonason. Kay Kennison.
Here.
Robert Lane.
Here.
Robert Mosher. Todd Shiver.
Here.
Ashley Stubbs.
Here.
Derek Whittam.
Here.
Connie Williams.
Here.
And myself, Jacob Whitman, I'm present. So I'd like to thank you all for coming. We'll move on to subsection 3, agenda approval. At this time, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the agenda for the November 6, 2013 meeting. So moved.
Oh, yeah.
Miles, so moved. Okay, is there a second? Robert, second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. We'll move on to subsection 4, approval of the minutes from October 30th, 2013.
Jake,
Ashley?
I'd like to move to approve the minutes from last week's meeting.
Okay. Miles, second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. We'll move on to subsection 5, reports. JD, how you doing? All right, so for my report, I have nothing to report. I'd like to apologize for missing last week's meeting. I was feeling under the weather. I'm feeling good now, so just didn't want to get you guys sick because you're all my friends.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. All right, do the advisors have any reports?
Only report I have is I will be out next week at a conference, so any communications or notifications should go to Sharon for SNA.
Okay, Sharon?
I don't have anything new to report, except that I will be sending an email reminder to all of our programs that we support that their annual reports are due, because that's only a couple weeks away and I haven't received any yet.
All right, thank you for that. 1 second. And when are those due by?
December 1st.
That's for the base funding.
All right, we'll move on to subsection 6, public comment. Is there any public comment at this time? All right, we'll move on to subsection 7, supplemental funding requests. We currently have no pending requests. So we'll move on to subsection 8, old business. We currently have no old business. As I understand, it was a pretty quick meeting last week. We'll move on to subsection 9, new business. We do have 2 groups talking today, so I would like to open up the floor to Andy Fields, Director of Recreation.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good, how you doing, Andy?
Pretty good. So I wanted to talk to you guys about rugby and just kind of invite you into the conversation because there's been some interest lately. And Alex Lee came as well to help answer any kind of specific rugby questions if that were to come up. But as you know, rugby has been a sport club for some time now and it's been supported through SNA. Well, they've had a lot of success. They've had some pretty high benchmarks and have been nationally broadcast and has central all over the nation, right? And actually, one of our graduates right now, Patrick Blair, right, is playing.
He's playing with the Sevens Eagles team, and so I believe Central's been mentioned on telecast with Pat. He's actually doing really well with them. They were just in Australia a couple weeks ago. They'll be in Dubai in about a week or 2.
And when and there's some video clips, which I didn't bring any, but if you guys were ever curious, we could get some, but where they actually are announcing these games, they're just being broadcast worldwide, and they say Central Washington University's Patrick Blair. So there's been a lot of national attention, international attention, actually coming to the university, which has started a discussion. And so it has gotten some interest from the president and from development and whatnot, saying, wow, our team is doing exceptionally well. They're basically Division I, more or less, right? Yeah, so there's some interest there on how to provide some more resources for rugby. And so they're a student group right? They reside here, they live here. So we've had one conversation, and so I wanted to come here immediately, because there was one conversation where we sat around the table with the president and the provost and a few other people saying, how, is this something that we want to examine? And one of the things I said, well, I need to get some input from the stakeholders. So I wanted to come here to you and to start talking about options, because they're starting to talk about options. And then I actually am meeting with the rugby teams directly after this meeting to get some input from them. But there's no real no decisions have been made. We're just having a conversation. That's all we are at this point. But I wanted to get some thoughts, because right now it's either, okay, how do we provide more resources through S&A, which is kind of challenging. The president can't really funnel money that way, right? It's a Pandora's box. Or do we look at moving rugby to varsity and move them over to athletics and out of S&A? That's a possibility. Or is there some sort of transition in between or whatnot? So that's kind of the conversation that we're having, that we've just started. And I think there's the big interest of, okay, so what if we did move them out into varsity? What are the concerns? What are we worried about? I did meet with the rugby leadership, and this would be men's and women's, because trying to make it equitable. So I met with both the leadership teams from the leadership officers and got their concerns. And just to fill you in, some of it was, okay, well, what about student input, right? Which could be addressed through like team captains and whatnot. Because when I brought that back, I brought that to the meeting, the first meeting, the only meeting. They said, what, do they want to run the budgets? And the students really, they don't want to run the budgets. They just want to have input in the direction of the team and whatnot. So it was really that aspect of it. And then the women's team was a bit nervous that if they didn't have winning seasons, would they be dropped or whatnot? And so I think that all those concerns could be addressed, but those were their primary concerns. But coming from this area, I mean, you guys have helped build rugby. You've provided support for rugby. You've enabled them to prosper. And so you guys are stakeholders in them. So I wanted to come get your thoughts and opinions so that I can adequately represent the stakeholders at these meetings and say, well, S&A feels that, we should do this, whatever this is. So that's really where I'm here today, because I just wanted to start the conversation. And I don't know with this, I've only been here 9 months, I don't know how fast this means, like things could happen, whether it's, 2 months or 2 years, I'm not sure. But I know that there's a lot of momentum right now.
Is it time for questions?
Yeah, Todd.
I always thought it was really odd that the national championship teams contenders that we have were not associated with the athletic department. And I like the idea of it being a varsity sport, because I think there would be more recognition and more head-to-head competition there and more recognition. It's kind of like, with the music department where I'm from, we have nationally competitive groups. There's not a student music ensemble that's getting the national attention. It's in the department. I would feel weird if it were out of the department getting that. And I'd want them in the department if they were getting national attention. But I guess my question is, what are the ramifications of you moving to varsity? Can the athletic department afford that? Is this something, could we still help you out if you needed help, if you were a varsity sport and you made it to a national championship and you needed help with the travel? How does that work? That would make a difference, right?
Yeah, I think, and I'm not sure I have an answer to that exactly, but there's all questions that are great questions to have. And for my role, so I'm in recreation, which is where rugby currently resides, we'd be giving up rugby, right? Which we love rugby. We love all the players. We love them. So we'd be giving up. But rugby is at a point where they either need a little bit more in order to have continued success, or they're probably going to naturally scale back. So kind of agreement. Like, this is a point where me personally, like,
You're wanting to take it to the next level, basically.
well, I'm
They
open
won't
either
take
way.
it.
If they want to stay, I love them. Because I mean, I'll put that on record. You know? But if they want to stay with us, then that's that would be ultimately what I would be fighting for or advocating for. Excuse me. You know. Sorry.
Connie, you have a question?
Yes, so just continuing on that line of questioning, have in your discussions about transitioning this over, have they agreed to provide the same support? Because right now you're for the most part self-support, right? I mean, your players, and I think that's rather unfair, honestly, that you have to be self-support as a program whenever athletic programs are going. So you would have to give that up as well. In other words, the students would no longer have to pay dues, correct?
Correct.
Now, have they agreed to provide you the same support in the athletic program plus some?
So there hasn't been any agreements, but that has been brought up.
I would say that would
Yeah.
be important to clarify.
Yeah, and especially Dennis Francois, the athletic director, he's very much like, if this were to happen, he would want them to be seen as equals to all the other
And
sports.
he's been good at that.
Yeah, so he would make sure, that's what he said in the meeting. Again, we've only had one meeting, so we haven't made any decisions on anything. And that's why I wanted to get that. But that support, because they are self-support quite a bit. I mean, SNA contributes, but their overall budget last year, I think, was, let's see, I have it here. I think it was 112,000 roughly, and they generated 108,000 on their own through like fees and fundraising. So,
Derek and then Ashley.
So I have a question about, so as I understand it, like when the football team leaves here to go somewhere, like the members of the football team who leave can be excused from like academic duties or whatever. Is that the case for them?
Yeah, so we get,
So
Corey
there would be no difference.
Corey Sinclair, the scorebook coordinator, gets a note, puts everybody's name on there, says why we're leaving. The players take that to their instructors. The instructor obviously has the right to say, most instructors are really good about working with us, so they are excused most of the time.
Ashley?
I'd like to yield to Richard.
I just want to add to the conversation that one of the reasons this conversation started coming forward was that we also don't have a coach for the rugby program. And so the question came in about the funding for a coach. And so the initial question came and said, well, if we do pay for a coach, because right now a coach is volunteer, in order to have the quality coaching that we need in order to continue at the pace of the quality that we've been performing, we need to possibly pay a coach. And so then that question came up, well, will we then start asking SNA to fund the coach as well and all that goes along with that? And so at some point there was a question of, well, if that were to be the case of funding a coach for rugby, then are we going to pay for a coach for wake sports and all these others? And so the question came about, is it feasible then for SNA to still fund that? And that's where this initial conversation first started, was basically to kind of meet that need. So I just wanted to highlight that as part of the why this conversation's come up.
and can I add to that too? Because the current volunteer coach, actually at the time that this conversation started, was in the running for the Olympic team coach, and he actually came in second. So, but thankfully we still have him. But at some point he's going to be coaching the Olympic team, and he won't be here anymore. So that was really how it started.
And I wanted to just add one other thing, the comment about the women's team. Obviously our women's team is not necessarily at the same competitive level as our men's team, but because of Title IX rules, if we create a male sport, we have to have equity for women in our sports teams. And so the idea of continuing that, so the question that the women asked wasn't that we don't have quality students also that program, it's just not as developed. And so if we move to a varsity type team where we're competing across the country with some of the most elite rugby teams, and if the women are losing because they're not yet at that level, I think that's why that comment is brought up. It's not that we don't value our women's team or anything, but that's some of the issues when you have a competitive team and a not, but also some of the rules regarding Title IX. And so I'll yield back to Andy and then I'm done.
Yeah, thanks. No, thank you. Because the women's team as well, they don't have a coach. Well, right now Alex is coaching them whenever he can fit it in, which he's a student. So he's coaching them whenever he can. And so they haven't had the resources. They haven't been out recruiting. And actually, when you look at the NCAA, the top 3 emerging sports, especially on the women's side, is women's rugby, equestrian, and sand volleyball. So it's an area that's growing.
Rob and then Sharon.
So if the sports program dropped a sport, then rugby could join?
The athletic department?
Yes.
See, I don't think they're going to drop. I haven't heard any conversation on that. I think they're just talking about how do they add, and then if so, where does the money come from? And then there's a question too that, I mean, there's lots of possibilities too, including a transition, like, you know, you were suggesting, like maybe SNA helps through the transition or something. I don't know at the current level, or maybe not. I don't know. You know, so I mean, there's some possibilities of what we could do.
Sharon?
Thinking about the actual players and the recruiting possibilities for the school, is there a benefit for the rugby team to be moved up to the
Varsity?
varsity?
Yes. So currently we have players coming from Northern California, Oregon, South Africa. Where else?
We have a couple one from Pennsylvania, Minnesota, one from Hawaii, a few from the Pacific Islands.
And they all come here to play rugby. And there's actually some that came here to play rugby are now transferring into their degree school somewhere else, right? They actually came here to play rugby. So there's definitely an attraction piece of recruitment, you know, of athletes coming in. And so that's a big component. When you add that varsity level, then the attraction is even greater. Maybe we can even keep some of those students here, you know, long term, you know, through their entire degree. You know, there's a lot of possibilities around that varsity piece. It also, I mean, we currently are in the Varsity Cup, which is, do you want to explain that really quick?
The Varsity Cup came out of some teams wanting more high-level competition for the playoff structure. And so the Varsity Cup has, right now it sits at 10 other teams from around the country. You've got Cal, UCLA, Utah, BYU, Dartmouth, Clemson, and there's a couple other teams as well. And so the Varsity Cup came about because all these teams wanted to come together and to play high-level rugby in a playoff knockout round atmosphere, instead of going to the actual playoffs where you're playing, you know, these lower-level teams, and you're kind of wasting your money, to be honest with you. And so the Varsity Cup has come about, so we don't feel like we're wasting our money right now. We're getting good quality games when we travel, and we're playing the best in the country, honestly.
So currently we're playing in the Varsity Cup?
Yeah.
But we're not a varsity.
We're not a varsity.
Are those schools that you named, are those varsity athletics or are those clubs?
Cal is for sure varsity. There's a few others that I'm not quite sure on.
Okay.
BYU is they're not a varsity, but they are supported like a varsity program.
They're
through the
virtual
university.
varsity,
Yeah.
is what they call it.
They just they're not varsity
Okay.
per se. And I believe all the other schools they're really close. If they're not varsity, they're kind of like us. They're pushing in that door open, trying to push that door open.
But I think Central is somewhat unique in the limited resources they have, Central Rugby, and being in that group. And so they're in it this year and next year, but then they could easily be pulled out of it because we're kind of an anomaly at this point. You know, it's just the way how the structure is and the limited resources that rugby has.
So moving to a varsity sport, would that almost guarantee a spot in the Varsity Cup year after year?
I think it would help tremendously. I'm not sure if it guaranteed, but you know, I think it would help tremendously for the team and their continued success.
JD?
If moved up to a varsity sport, would there need to be any accommodations made with the field? Would there need to be, because we'd have teams coming here to play, would we have to have better stands, or what's the?
And so we've already been talking about the stadium and, you know, kind of upgrades, and I've been in a few committee meetings where we've been talking about, you know, just fields in general, field use, and how it's working in shared facilities with athletics. And we're already looking at some point in the future, maybe moving the track and then expanding the field and then adding more stands, and you know, to make Tomlinson, you know, that much greater. And if so, then it would also accommodate rugby as well. Currently, rugby is using the soccer field, and so you know, athletics would just kind of take them in and say, you know, make it happen as far as, you know, the field use and whatnot. So we're always, you know, recreation, we're always a bit taxed because, you know, we share all these facilities, everybody does, and so we're always trying to find field use. That's probably our number one challenge.
Rob and then Ashley.
You
And
touched
Tarsh.
on how women's rugby might not be ready to make the step to a varsity sport. Are there any women's club teams that would be ready to make the step to a varsity sport more so than women's rugby?
Yeah, I feel like they're all about the same,
Yeah.
like as far as, you know, and quite honestly, some of the discussions that we've had, we think that they'd be able to make some progress pretty fast within a couple of years, especially if they had the resources and then they had like partial scholarships.
Yeah.
And they had, you know, they were paying dues and they were able to recruit and they had a coach. You know, I mean, I think they would do pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're coaching them.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they're you know, on the West Coast for women's rugby, Stanford's like the high mark for women's rugby, but there's nobody really below them. Everybody's kind of on the same plane. Washington State's got a decent team too, but they're kind of up and down. But for women's rugby, if you start, you know, if they get a full-time coach that recruits, you know, there's no reason they can't be competing for national championships within 2 to 5 years, honestly.
Ashley and then Derek.
Yeah, I sort of two-part question. You mentioned that this process could take a couple years, which I think is fair. I mean, just, you know,
Yeah.
potentially. And that we have a pretty decent diversity, that, you know, we draw students in from all over the country based on our reputation. What draws students to play rugby here beyond our reputation? Is that the only thing that's running here?
Well, from my understanding.
That's bad, I'm just wondering.
No, yeah. Well, right now we have an exceptional team. We've got an exceptional coach, and in the rugby world, Central Washington University's rugby team is they're seen as the future, right? That's the future of rugby for U.S. and kind of turning out that high quality. So I think the attraction pieces, you know, those athletes that, you know, played in high school that really want to go to a quality university and play on a quality team. And so that's the big attraction, I would say. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, and then, you know, obviously like any recruiting school that's recruiting, you know, getting national attention definitely helps. And having our coach right now, Tony, who's with the USA Falcons, which is the developmental sevens team, you know, that obviously, that helps a lot in your recruiting. People want to come and play for Tony, so.
Okay, I have a second part. And that is that sorry, I lost it. You know, if this is a process that takes a couple years, what sort of mentoring do you have in the program right now? As far as what's the upperclassmen to lowerclassmen ratio that could potentially leave a very freshman team if or when this varsity turnover happens?
So the past couple of years, we've brought in about 20 freshmen each year. Right now we honestly only have like 2 seniors.
Okay.
Everybody else is a junior or lower. And even at that junior level, we have maybe 10. And then your sophomores are about, you know, 15 to 20, and then your freshmen are about 20, 22. So potentially that is a possibility, but we're actually, like in the next couple of years, we're actually not even losing that many people, which means our junior and senior class are going to be huge come 2 years down the road, where we've got, you know, 40 upperclassmen, and we're still trying to bring more freshmen, sophomores in. So.
At this time, we're past the 10 minutes, so I'd like to entertain a motion to extend discussion until 6:15.
So moved.
JD moved, I'll second. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. We'll talk until 6:15. Any other questions? Derek.
I have a question. First of all,
Okay, yeah, excused. I had a question. So how's it gonna work becoming a varsity sport? Because I think right now anyone can join, correct?
Right.
It's a club. So how's that gonna work if it's a varsity sport? Like, I think that's a great aspect that anyone can play rugby that they wanna play. So if it becomes varsity, there's gonna be cuts, they can't make the team, I mean, how does that work out?
Right, I'd assume that and we haven't even broached that topic yet, which is a great topic. But I would think that we could probably, that's something I could bring back to the group and say, what would that look like? There was a side conversation I had, an idea of, what if there was still a club, that, wasn't competing at the national level, but practiced with the team. I mean, that could be a possibility. Or what if we grandfather in all the existing players and then, it moves across into varsity, and then it would be just like football, where people try out.
All right. I'm just kind of worried about losing, like, if it becomes varsity, like the atmosphere of the sport. I see other players everywhere because it's such a big team.
So, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
We've already done that this year. So this year what we did is we had about a 2 or 3 week trial with new players. They came in, they worked out. A few players were asked to stay. A few were actually, we said, we just, we don't have limited space and coaches and everything like that. We just don't have enough space for everybody.
Okay.
So we let a few people go, but we kept a few as well. And that's something we've talked about doing in the future. If we stay as a club or varsity or whatever, we've talked about doing that as well, where you kind of have a tryout period for a couple of weeks. Guys come out, they play, they run around a little bit, and then we go from there.
Okay. Does the committee have any further questions? All right.
So could I ask if there's any concerns or anything that you would like me to bring to the meeting, on your behalf? I would greatly appreciate it. Even if it doesn't happen right now, you can always email me or call me or come talk with me or whatever. But I would just like to adequately represent SNA as one of the stakeholders who've helped rugby get to where they are right now. It's great success. So
Awesome. We appreciate you coming out.
thank you.
Good presentation. And if we have any questions, we'll bring them to you. Thanks, Andy. All right. At this time, I'd like to move on to subsection B, and I'd like to give the floor to Sheree Wilson, Associate Director of the Student Union. Okay, and Sharon's going to assist her.
Yes, we're tag teaming this. So, do you want to start with the budget?
So my role as the Student Funds Financial Manager is to manage not only SNA funds, but sub-funds, rec funds, and have another list as well. But when we built the building, there were funds that we set aside in the 522 fund, which is the SNA category. Now, the funds that were set aside to be strictly for construction or the development of the building, not operating funds, because you guys see the operating funds. We had approximately $250,000 left over, and that money is sitting in a separate PID outside of the SNA PIDs, but it's still within the 522 fund. And given that it is within the 522 fund, it is under the dean's authority. So that would be Sarah Swatter. And so we've been carrying these funds forward until we had a project that actually dealt with the structural components of the building. The cracks in the floors are a structural component in the building. If we had a major roofing issue, they could have potentially been used for that. Well, we are just now getting to the age of the building where we are starting to have projects that deal with the structure of the building. And so the dean has, the funds have already been committed to her to ensure that she uses them for the correct purpose. And the project that Cherie is going to talk to you about is the purpose that the dean has elected to use them on. So I just want to make sure you guys understood that these aren't operating funds that we allocated to any base budget. They're carried forward for a specific purpose.
Okay. Sheree.
Okay, so the project that we're using it on, we're really excited about. It's going to be a project that's done over the winter break when the ballroom is not used as often. And what it's going to consist of is adding permanent trussing into the ceilings of the ballroom. And trussing is where you'll see the lights hanging from the aluminum bars, frames. Currently, whenever we do set up whenever we do set up trussing, we build it from the floor up. So it's a lengthy process. It usually takes my staff 2 days to build it, the day of the event, and at least a day to tear it down. So we're talking about 4 days where the ballroom's offline and not being allowed to be used for other events. So some of the benefits so what it's going to be is it's going to be 2 motorized trussing systems that come down, electronically come down. And there's going to be a bar that we can attach once they come down, because as you probably all know, the ballroom is split into 4 sections, so it'll still allow for those sections to close off. That bar will be added whenever we bring that trussing down. So some of the benefits to doing this, I wrote a list so I wouldn't forget, is obviously to enhance the program and event visual appearance. It'll help to reduce safety issues by having the trussing in the ceiling instead of sitting on the floor, which can cause a tripping hazard because the way the legs come out, they come out in like a T-shaped, so it's in the way of the when people walk through the aisles. And we've also had entertainers, believe it or not, hang on our current trussing, which is obviously a huge safety hazard, so this will eliminate that issue. It'll reduce the amount of days that we have to have the ballroom offline to be able to utilize it more throughout the year, and increase the amount of programs that we can schedule in the ballroom throughout the year. It's going to be LED lighting. Currently we use halogen lights. LED is more efficient, energy efficient. Lasts up to, I've seen 20, 30 times longer than halogens, reducing the cost of the light bulbs replacements. We won't need the gels because with LED lighting, you can do any color you want. It's all inclusive. It'll increase our sight lines, which in turn will also increase our seating capacity for the space. We're figuring right now approximately 50 additional seats that we'll be able to get in there. It will reduce our costs for setup and takedown that we don't currently bill back to our customers. So we're eating that cost right now, so that'll help with our budgets. And it'll improve the quality of life for the building and staff, and event staff by reducing the number of hours required for the major events. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
So what are we talking about as far as the trussing is concerned? We're talking about that big sort of big metal cage that like the lights and speakers and stuff
Absolutely.
like that attaches to? Okay.
Were you at the Wayne Brady show?
No.
Okay. If any of you were at the Wayne Brady show, it was all set up. The trussing was all set up.
I walked by and I saw like
Yes.
the big cage that in the sort of back. So you're talking about basically having a cage that, big sort of infrastructure that can be lowered from the ceiling, stuff attached, and then raised.
Correct.
So who could, is this like fixed lighting or is this like controlled lighting?
It's controlled lighting.
Okay.
They'll still be able to control the lighting, but instead of building the cage, it's already in the ceiling. They can do any of the adjustments pretty easily by adding the permanent trussing.
So basically you're laying it out like the way that a theater would be laid.
Correct.
Okay.
Any further questions from the committee? Ashley?
Where in the ballroom, let me see, how can I use this? With all 4 sections open, there's basically 2 generic stage setups. Either you have the stage with the ballroom horizontal, or you have it with the stage at one end, all Wayne Brady.
Correct.
Where will the lights be, and can you do both stage setups?
Okay. Good question. So the majority of the time we set the room widthwise, so which means that we have seating. Everybody's looking at sections B and C. The staging is in sections B and C in the center of the room. That's where the trussing is going to be, in between B and C. There will not be trussing the other direction. Cost efficiency wise, it was too expensive to add that as well. And we don't utilize that setup nearly as much as the other setup. So, but that brings up a good point too, because the other piece that we're adding in here is we're adding in 3 additional projectors into the ceilings and 2 additional screens. When we built the building, every single section, A through D, has its own screen. However, only 3 sections has a projector, just like this one, that comes down from the ceiling. And the reason was, when we started building the building, they realized that all the heating and air conditioning ducting was where that projector needed to sit. So that we didn't end up getting a projector, which has been problematic since we built the building because we can't use that space with a projector, that one space. So the engineers have figured out a way to have a projector in that one space. So we'll have another projector there. And we're also adding 2 more projectors when we do set it up lengthwise like Wayne Brady was, that we'll be able to fly down 2 more screens lengthwise with 2 projectors in the ceiling as well. So.
One more.
Ashley and Derek.
Okay, yield Richard.
One of the things that SNA doesn't necessarily have funding vote for this, but representing the Dean of Students Office, it is always good if you all eventually would make an advisory vote. It doesn't have to follow the other process because it's just advisory. So if this is eventually something that you all would support and you think it's a good idea, and to let the dean know that you support it, a motion of support would always be a great thing for you to consider. So I'll just throw that out there for recommendation.
And I should mention that throughout this whole process, I'm also the advisor to the Student Union Advisory Board, made up of all students. I'm a non-voting member, but I have shared all this information with them throughout last year's board and this year's board. So they've been supportive of the project as well.
Derek.
Why wasn't this done originally?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, when we built this building, and I was here when we built this building, there were a few things that were cut from the building, and it's just money.
So it was an issue of money, but now we have the money, so
Absolutely.
we might as well do it.
Yep.
But it was in the plan originally to kind of do it.
You know, I'm not sure if it even made the plan at that point because there were so many other priorities that was ahead of it.
Ashley and then JD.
I'd like to move to support the trussing project on behalf of
Is there a second? Robert, second. Any discussion?
the board. Yeah.
Ashley.
Well, I would like to say, as a student with campus activities who plans a lot of programs in that facility, it is very helpful to know that the room will not be booked for long periods of time to build and tear down. It really does take up a lot of the calendar. And that I'm really excited for the project to be done because I'm working on programming January.
JD, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just have one question. How many events is this going to be able to support? How many more events are you going to be able to support with this? Or maybe a better question is, how many events require this trussing?
We have approximately right now about 50 events throughout the year that have trussing. I believe, however, that's going to grow once people see the opportunities that are there. It's just really going to make that ballroom amazing, I think. I mean, people are going to come because it has that capability and it's easy to do.
One more question. Is that going to cost is the fact that you're going to have the trussing now, is it going to cost more for the people to have the trussing set up, or is it going to be the same cost?
It will most likely be the same cost because, like I mentioned before, we don't currently charge for our labor with the staffing to set the space up, so that's not a charge that we pass along. If we were to do that, nobody would use our current trussing because it would be too expensive. So we've never charged for that, and so it would stay the same. We do charge for the equipment, and we'll continue to do that.
Todd.
Just before we vote, because we still have a
Yes.
motion.
We still,
on the
there's a motion on the
table.
table, yes, sir.
I would like to know the amount of money we are supporting. What's the
Thank
total
you.
cost of the project?
Sharon?
So the amount that's in the for structural components of the building, and this is actually being permanently attached to into the
Right.
structure. But it's 250, I think it's 252,000, and the rest is coming from Cherie's reserves and her
Cherie's
FF&E
reserves.
My
I kinda like
FF&E
that.
budget.
So
I mean,
every-
Todd's reserves.
She puts aside every year funds to cover equipment upgrades, so the equipment for like the actual LED lights
Mhm.
and those parts of the project she is paying for out of that reserve budget.
Any further discussion? Derek?
Yeah, so, what exactly is it costing to do this? I'm just curious.
Total project cost is about $420,000.
So about half of that's from the reserve, half of it's from Cherie's reserve.
Our FF&E budget we've been saving for quite a few years, just for these type of projects.
Any further questions? I was just gonna say, one of my biggest concerns is the fact that the lights only face one direction. So you just bring that, whoever. Because I've heard a lot of events like, well, you mentioned Malcolmore, you know, those big events are only every few years, but you've got Malcolmore where the event was Longwise, you've got Wayne Brady where the event was Longwise, and then Homecoming, the event's Longwise.
So, Jacob, for your concern, we still will be able to do that. We'll just have to build those ones.
Okay.
And it's usually once a year.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, like, Mr. and Mrs. Central is usually set up the other way.
Okay.
I mean, most of our banquets are usually set up that
Yeah,
way.
and orientation's up the other way.
Right.
The drag shows.
Yeah, with
Right.
glass. Okay.
Right, so the few and far between that are set up the other way, normally it's only because we're expecting it to be a sold-out show, and that
Yeah.
holds more people in
Okay.
that direction. And we will still be able to set up that
Okay.
trussing, we already have it, we already have everything. so.
Okay, cool. Good to know.
Yeah.
Any further discussion?
All questions?
Is there any dissent? Nope. All right, we're gonna move to vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, motion of support passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sheree. All right, so we'll move on to other business, subsection 10, communications received. I have received none, no communications. All right, so we'll move on to public comment, second call. Is there any comment from the public at this time? All right, so we'll move on to subsection 12, adjournment. At this time, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. So moved by Miles. Is there a second? Second by JD. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Meeting adjourned at 6:29 PM.